Don't give up, you know it's true. You gotta do what you wanna do.
Hello, welcome to UPSC Gangsters. This is Arjun Aryan, and I'll be taking you through the editorial analysis of the Hindu newspaper for the date 10th October 2017. Alright, so for the 10th October, the first editorial, the important editorial, the title says, "At Bonn, stay the course. Renegotiation of the Paris Agreement on climate change is not a viable option." Alright, so that is the subheading. This gives you an idea about what the editorial is, and important point what you should note from the subheading is renegotiation of the Paris Climate Agreement is not viable, in the sense if you're going to renegotiate or you're going to bring down certain standards or you're going to ease certain norms or whatever, that is going to really affect us in the future. It is not at all an option to even think about. That is what they're saying. Of course, additional norms can be there. Something to reduce cannot be there, and we cannot afford that. Okay, let's begin with the editorial. Between November 6th and 17th this year, world leaders, delegates from various countries and others from various and other businesses, along with media and other representatives of civil society, will gather at Bonn for the 23rd Conference of the Parties, COP23, of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. The meeting will primarily concentrate on various aspects associated with the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which was negotiated at the COP21 and entered into force or became legally binding on November 4th, 2016. Alright, so this is when the Paris Accord actually happened, and it came into force from 2016 November. Alright, it has been almost a year now. So in this editorial it is saying legally binding, but please note, not everything is legally binding. Alright, there are certain provisions that are legally binding, which are like the national targets and all that. So the national targets mean the country's targets for reducing the carbon emission. Alright, but it does not specify the target. That will be determined by that country's government itself. But they should have a framework for having a national a determined number. That should be there. Alright, that is binding. Alright, whether what kind of number they should have, how they should reduce, and what are the ways they should use, that is not mentioned. So at places where it is supposed to be legally binding, it is those provisions where the government has to act, alright, but not how the numbers and all is not there. So in a way it is partially binding and partially not binding. Alright, so it's not completely legally binding, that you should remember. COP23 will be presided by Frank Bainimarama, Prime Minister of Fiji. So this place is actually in Fiji. Bonn is actually there in Fiji, being an island nation. So next one, Prime Minister of Fiji. It is fitting that a Pacific island nation chairs this year's COP, as the very existence of low-lying islands is threatened by sea level rise due to climate change. This is a fact. The first things to be wiped out, the first land structures that will be wiped out due to the effect of climate change as a result of the sea rise would be the island nations. Alright, so island nations will be more vulnerable to climate change than the normal lands. So Hawaii is more vulnerable compared to the United States entirely, right? So they will be the first to have the drastic and most dangerous effects of climate change. So the next line, the meetings in Bonn will cover a wide range of issues, including adjusting to living in a warmer world with the associated impacts, known as adaptation to climate change and reduction in greenhouse gases, referred to as mitigation. So, two terms have been given here. Their definition, the proper simplest definition possible. Alright, the first thing is adaptation. For adaptation, what the definition is obviously how to cope up with the rise in temperature. That is adaptation. And mitigation is how we are reducing the carbon dioxide or the pollutants that are being released to the atmosphere. Alright, so that is what mitigation is. So known as adaptation to climate change and reduction in greenhouse gases, referred to as mitigation. They will also include sessions on loss and damage or the means of addressing economic and non-economic forfeitures and potential injury associated with climate change. Alright, these are the things they will also discuss about. So please make a faint note of it, because after the meeting actually happened, we will know the entire points of what happened. Right? So that is more important. These are speculative things. So finally, the discussions will be about the implementation of targets that were decided by each country ahead of the Paris meeting, referred to as the nationally determined contributions, and the finance, capacity building and technology transfer required by developing countries from rich countries. So the focus will be on these 2 points. Like I said, the first focus is going to be the nationally determined contributions. Nationally determined contributions are those numbers that are fixed by a country's government, saying that we will reduce the carbon emissions to a certain percentage or to a certain degree. Alright, so that will be determined by the government itself, and these whenever they have a number, they are supposed to comply by it. Alright, the country will decide what the numbers are, and they will do those necessary things to comply by those numbers. Those are known as nationally determined contributions. And next thing is, the developing countries were supposed to get technology transfer from the developed nations, from the rich nations, to mitigate the climate effects. Why this logic? Why the rich nations are supposed to do something like this? It is part of the varied responsibility, right? Variable responsibility exists. When Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister of India, he put forward the term because it were these developed nations, alright, those developed countries, the rich economic powerhouses, that were actually responsible for the climate change we are witnessing today, not the developing countries. We have just started, we are young, right? And even when you compare in that way, we are nowhere near the contributions that have the greenhouse gases contribution that have come out of the developed nations. USA, for example, alright, you have to note down this point. USA, for example, has been the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world in history. Like, in the sense, if you take any timeline since the earth was created or whatever, alright, a single landform or a single nation that has been responsible for most abuse of atmosphere, or the single most entity that has put the greenhouse gases or produced or emitted the most carbon molecules to the atmosphere, the answer is USA. Alright, so along with USA, all the other industrialized countries, when they were going through the industrialization phase, they polluted the atmosphere like anything. Alright, and developing countries, Manmohan Singh actually stood up for the developing countries, saying that we cannot contribute the same amount to what the developing countries are supposed to contribute, because we are not developed. Alright, we are not rich, we are not a rich nation, point number one. Alright, and then we didn't cause these things anyway, and why are you pressurizing us? Right, we will also contribute, we will also do our part in the best way possible, but keeping us in the same line like the rest of the richer nations, that is not possible, is what they are saying. Alright, so that is only known as the varied responsibilities. Alright, so the partial whatever responsibilities that should be shared among the nations in a responsible manner. So this will also be negotiated, and along with the share of responsibilities, the rich nations were also expected to give technology transfer to the developing nations. For example, the new latest solar technology, latest in battery technology, latest in windmill technology, it was expected from the developed nations to pass over that technology to the developing nations, so that they can mitigate in a faster and in a more efficient manner, so that they didn't wait for that development to come in that developing nation, so they can just get the technology from the developed nation, and it would help the developing nations to better mitigate and better follow the climate accords. Alright, they will also include session on loss and damage, or the means of addressing economic and non-economic forfeitures. That's what it's all, the entire thing meant to, right? Finally, the discussions will be about the implementation of targets were decided by each country, national targets, right? So referred to as nationally determined contributions, and then the transfer of technology required by developing countries from rich nations. According to the procedures of the UNFCCC, the meetings in Bonn will include the session of the COP23, the 13th session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of parties to the Kyoto Protocol, CMP13. Alright, so COP23 is supposed to be the 13th session of the Conference of the Parties, COP's Conference of the Parties, alright, as a meeting the parties of the Kyoto Protocol. So they're gonna discuss about how to go further about the Kyoto Protocol first point. Alright, and Kyoto Protocol is about the protocol or the agreement that was agreed to actually reduce the GHG gases, right? So those HFCs and CFCs and all that. So those gases were discussed during the Kyoto Protocol. Paris Agreement is about the degrees to how to limit the global temperature increase to just 2%, and not go make it stay under that 2 degree centigrade rise. So the Paris Agreement is about the temperature increase. Kyoto Protocol is about the GHG gases. Alright, so that you should remember. So yeah, obviously the second thing is about the other point. The other part of the meeting is the second part of the first session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as a meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. Alright, so Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement, these will be the two main parts of the climate delegation, the climate meeting that is going to happen in Fiji right now. Alright, the decision-making bodies for the convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, or the COP. Alright, so the decision-making bodies, the major decisions are made, right? That is only known as, that will come under the COP, Conference of Parties, and CMP and CMA respectively. In addition, the Bonn meetings will include 47th sessions of the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, which assists on science and technology, and subsidiary body for implementation, which supports the work of 3 bodies through assessment and review. Alright, so the SBSTA, subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, please note it down. They come under UNFCCC. If they say that it comes under UNO or something like that, it is wrong. Alright, so this might very well be one of the prelims question. The subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, it comes under the UNFCCC, and it will guide all these 3 parts of UNFCCC of the conferences, alright, to with their scientific knowledge and all that, and work towards the important issues, alright, that support the work of these 3 bodies. They will advise them, alright. Also, the ad hoc working group of the Paris Agreement will meet and is tasked with important issues such as NDCs, so nationally determined contributions, adaptation, transparency, and global stockade. So this would be those three. There will be a ad hoc group also that would be made. Ad hoc group is a temporary body. Alright, so a temporary body that will be made to see how the Paris Agreement has gone through and all that. Alright, so the issues such as NDCs, adaptation, how the countries have behaved with their nationally determined contributions number, how transparent are they, and how much they are willing to, globally reduce the degrees and all that, how compliant they are. That will be reviewed by an ad hoc committee. Alright, next point. At the Paris COP, countries agreed to try and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So this is the limit that has been set. Obviously you have to remember, don't ever think of clearing UPSC without knowing this number. Alright, this is something very very basic. Alright, so 1.5 degrees centigrade was the number that was previously agreed. Alright, and now the discussions have been about around 2 degrees mark. Alright, so I'm reading the next point, the continuation of the point. But since previous discussions had centered on the Lakshman Rekha of 2 degrees centigrade, this required renewed understanding of the policies and actions required to stay within a lower target. Half a degree reduction may seem really small, but in terms of the impacts on ecosystems, geophysical cycles, and diverse life forms on Earth, this has a substantial difference. Alright, so previous discussions were on 2 centigrades, right? So you should remember, because of from 2 centigrades it has been reduced to 1.5 degree centigrades. Everybody were asking for 2 degrees centigrades, but it has been agreed, no, we have to go ahead with 1.5 degrees centigrade. And how half a degree reduction would affect the Earth, the points have been given. Alright, so half a degree reduction will have huge impacts on the ecosystem, the geophysical cycles, which is climate, rain, summer, winter, autumn, and all that. Alright, and diverse life forms on Earth. So there has been a lot of decline in wildlife too because of climate change, right? So that 0.5 degrees centigrade will change all of these things. So next point, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has therefore undertaken the task of preparing a special report on the impacts of a warming of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels and the global response needed to achieve these. Alright, so even this 1.5 degrees, not this point, is 1.5 degrees plus the pre-industrial temperature levels. Alright, not the current prevailing temperature plus 1.5 degrees. They're going back to the pre-industrial levels, which dates back to around like 400 years back sorts. Alright, so nearly 300 years at an average. So to put all the major economies into play, it will be 200 years actually. So before 200 years, what the temperature was, that average temperature plus 1.5 degrees centigrade. So right, so that is the determined number. Alright, so 1.5 degrees centigrade plus the pre-industrial level. Please keep that in mind. This is a huge point. It makes huge difference in your understanding about that 1.5 degrees and the climate change agreements that have been agreed to. Alright, so the IPCC has therefore undertaken the task of preparing a special report on the impact of that 1.5 degree increase. Alright, so this is actually to shut up those people who are saying that we need to stick to the 2 degrees centigrade increase. Alright, so IPCC will actually find out all those impacts that has been done because of the 1.5 degrees increase. Alright, and it will show. So it will show something like to the people, to the government, saying that see, so much of stuff has changed and it has impacted the planet in so many ways, and as such, alright, this 1.5 degree centigrade rise, and you want 2 degree centigrade, so that will be much more worse, right? So to shut those people down, obviously this is going to happen, and the IPCC is going to take care of it. Next line. Many scientists who research climate change, however, believe that we are on our way to a world that is 4 degrees centigrade warmer than, and that limiting warming to less than 1.5 degrees centigrade is a pipe dream. Alright, so right now we are going towards a 4 degree phase. Alright, so it means that we are in 3 point something right now, and we are 4 degrees plus the pre-industrial level already. Alright, so bringing down that 4 degrees centigrade rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade, it's more than half, right? So more than half is just a pipe dream they feel. Enough is not done, they feel. A recent paper in Nature Geoscience by R.J. Miller. So a recent paper in Nature Geoscience by R.J. Miller and colleagues analysis scenarios to demonstrate that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade is not yet a geophysical impossibility. So his book actually says limiting to the 1.5 degrees things is not something of a huge task, it is possible, he's saying. But this would imply continuing to strengthen pledges for the 2030 is the target year, alright. By 2030 they are trying to bring down the emissions, emissions and everything, and they are trying to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. That's what they mean by whenever they are referring to 2030. So, but this would imply continuing to strengthen pledges for 2030, deepening the mitigation targets rapidly and deeply, and based on the current conditions in global discussions and national targets, it is now clear that emissions can drop precipitously. So understood, governments everywhere are not serious, only few governments are serious, and especially USA is not serious. The biggest contributor in history is not serious, and compared to that, China is actually investing a lot on green energy, on windmills and solar and all that. Alright, China is actually pumping a lot of money into the green sector, so that you should note. But it's not happening in USA, so that's how it happens. One place it happens, another place it's not happening. So it is all almost like a neutral level. Alright, so yeah, China is also the biggest investor in the mitigation technologies. Alright, so that also you should note. You should remember that China actually is leading the world in investing in green technology and the transfer of using fossil fuels to the greener sources. So next, Article 14 of the agreement provides the details on the targets, taking stock and reviewing them and the progress made towards long-term goals. The first such stock taking, covering all aspects such as mitigation, adaptation, communications, and support for implementation, is expected to take place in 2023. So the interim meetings, all this is, alright. So just remember, in 2023, alright, the first stock taking. So whatever points that I have done, not done, so it's like a review. So the first review of covering the mitigation, adaptation, communication, support of for implementation that has been received from the richer countries to the developing economies. All of that is going to be tabled down and discussed during the meeting in 2023. Alright, but meetings to prepare for this have already begun and have to conclude by 2018. Alright, to get to that position of 2023 negotiations and discussions, the work has already begun, alright, and it has to end by 2018. So meaning the survey and whatever that has been done, the national targets and all that, that has to be done till 2018, and those things will be compiled, and it takes years for them to understand the dynamics of the nation and all that, and it will be portrayed in 2023. Adaptation is increasingly also expected to become central at the COP meetings, which for the most part have focused on mitigation. To learn more about the implications of stock taking, see the policy brief of the Center for Science and Environment website. Alright, so if you want to see that, you can have a look at it. Anyways, when the meeting is underway and it is done, all the further updates will come, and the references will be taken from this as well. Next point, the subheading says countries and challenges. This is the first COP after the United States pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and implications of this at a global platform are likely to become more evident. Several states and cities within the US, along with thousands of businesses and celebrities, have used this chance to initiate voluntary actions across the country. So like I said previously, Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, right? And after he pulled out, there are several states within the US, like California, for example. They have pledged their support for the Paris Agreement. Alright, I told you that the states have a better autonomy in the United States compared to other countries and India, for example. Alright, and they, along with celebrities and other big businesses and all, they have complied to the standards of the Paris Agreement. Alright. For instance, billionaire and former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, and California Governor Jerry Brown launched America's Pledge, an initiative that is expected to report on the efforts of US states. Alright, so they have created their own body known as the Michael Bloomberg and the California Governor Jerry Brown. They have launched America's Pledge. So the body's name is America's Pledge. So America's Pledge is going to be meeting at the COP alongside, of course, US government people will also be there, but America's Pledge body, right? That is also going to meet those people at the COP conference. So this is another example of how autonomous the state actually acts, and how even in previous articles, editorials, we discussed how the states should have their own offices and relationship with the other countries. When at the places where the country negotiations fail, the state's negotiation with a particular country on business front will succeed. Alright, like how Kerala struck a deal with the Middle Eastern country, alright, Sharjah. So how that happened. So those things, alright. So that this is an example, a concentrated example of that. So they are sending their own delegation to the COP. So next line. So to report on the US greenhouse gas emissions, and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative of the 9 northeastern states has proposed another 30% drop in power plant emissions from 2020 to 2030. So the California governor and Michael Bloomberg, alright, they have announced America's Pledge, an initiative that is expected to report on the efforts of US states and sub-state entities to reduce GHG emissions. And the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, this is another body that has been formed by USA, alright, by the states. So this includes those northeastern states. They have proposed another 30% drop in power plant emissions from 2020 to 2030, meaning they're going to shut down a lot of coal plants and they're going to move to greener technologies, alright, and they have pledged for a 30% drop of it. Moreover, it has been reported that a US delegation will in any case attend the Bonn COP and in all Paris Agreement related meetings until 2020, while other major signatories have reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement. Nevertheless, there is speculation whether the formal withdrawal of the US would alter the stance taken by Europe, Australia, and large countries at the COP, and what role, if any, the US would play behind the scenes. So, the speculation is how USA would pursue the other countries to actually withdraw from the climate accord. Alright, that is the only speculation. European Union has given its unconditional support to the Paris Accord, and many other nations have also done that. But you should be wary of nations like Israel and all. Alright, US is close ally. So they might be, kind of trying to pursue or, talk those nations out of this EOP agreement, which is a possibility. So we have to see what happens in the near future. According to earlier reports from the UN and other groups, the NDCs, when added up, fall short of what is needed to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade and will likely take us about a degree higher. Alright, so the national determined contributions. Alright, according to a UN research body. Alright, so the national determined contributions when by different nations, when they have been added up, will not be able to stop the temperature rise from under 2 degrees. So they are saying actually it will actually add a degree more, which means it is going to a path of 3 degrees. Alright, furthermore, NDCs are conditional. They depend on financial and technological support from rich countries for their full implementation. So if the financial support and the technological support from the rich countries are not going to the poorer nations, then the NDCs will not make any sense. Right? James Hansen, the distinguished climate scientist, writes in his blog that carbon dioxide and methane are increasing faster than a decade ago, and that efforts being made now at the global and state levels are half measures and soothing at baffling expedients. So, note this point. Already a climate scientist says that carbon dioxide and methane, alright, carbon dioxide and methane, they are increasing faster than what it was a decade ago. Alright, 10 years back, how the rate of increase of carbon dioxide and methane were, right now it is increasing even more, he's saying. As a result, young people will be entering a period of consequences. As disheartening as his remarks are, it is also evident that the political conditions prevalent today are not favorable to renegotiate the Paris Accord, since the planet and its inhabitants will still have to deal with the impacts of climate change. Our only hope is to see a greater readiness on the part of all nations to compromise on their erstwhile hard positions and sincerity to make progress in reducing emissions and building climate resilient in the development. Alright, this is the conclusive point. So anyways, we're gonna face the wrath of the climate change in the near future. The younger generations anyways are gonna deal with it, but we can reduce the impact that is gonna be there, because even if we kind of reduce, the fact is, even if you bring down the emissions right now to 1.5 degrees, whatever changes that has been made till this date, alright, it will take its own time to happen and for it to reduce. Already we have altered the oceanic currents and the climate currents and all that. We have already altered it, and the global sea level rise will also will continue to rise, and the polar ice caps will also melt. There is a lot of alterations that are already in place and it is happening. Alright, it will take its time to subside. Alright, so that is what this last point means. So anyways, we're gonna deal with it, and with whatever negotiations, with not any steadfast implementation and all that, supposed to get worse, they are saying. Alright, let's go to the next editorial.